Hello and welcome to the PhD Life Raft podcast. I'm Emma Brzezinski and today I am talking to the wonderful Gina Holmes. We are talking about how to manage your supervisor. And Gina is drawing on her experience both as a supervisee and as a supervisor to give some very practical advice on how to manage what can be sometimes quite a difficult relationship. So I do hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, Gina.
Hi, Emma. How are you?
I am well. It is lovely to meet you. Today we're going to be talking about managing your supervisor, which is a challenge for lots of PhD researchers. But before we get into that, I am going to just invite you, as I do with everybody, just to introduce yourself and to say a bit about your own PhD journey.
Thanks. Oh, yeah. So I completed my second PhD. Let's start with that. I started my first PhD immediately after my undergraduate degree, and 18 months in, decided this was absolutely not for me.
Okay.
Not working. I was supervised between two universities, one in the UK, one in Europe, and it was a fabulous, fabulous experience, deeply intellectual, very challenging, and my life way too hard for me. So after a faculty restructure, I pulled out and went off into industry for a number of years, and then accidentally ended up back at the university teaching. About 4 or 5 years after that, it became abundantly clear that in order to stay in the teaching space that I wanted to be in, I needed to do a PhD, and that was not my own intention. It was not something that I particularly wanted to do. So I slightly grudgingly on a program, which I was doing part-time alongside being a senior lecturer in my department. I ended up as head of department, again, grudgingly, because other people wouldn't do it.
Wow.
And whilst I was doing my part-time PhD as head of department in the UK, my dad, who's in Australia, got sick, and I ended up going backwards and forwards between Australia and the UK to be with him, and had various other things going on. I finally finished 9 years later.
Oh, no.
Not without some serious stress on the way.
Yes, 9 years.
I did every single life event. Life's much harder when you're doing a doctorate of some sort. And
Right.
I think I went through every single event on that list that, like the Samaritans puts out of the big life events. I think I did all of them at least once. Bereavement, divorce, job changes, house moves, major operations, you name it. I'd been through all of it. It was a long trip, and it was a tricky trip. It was a very, very rewarding trip once I got the hang of it. But I'm not a natural academic, and I really struggled with big chunks of it. And a big part of that, which is why I'm talking to you today, was the relationship with my supervisory team, which was a bit bumpy at times. And that really didn't help the situation. I'm sure I was part of the problem. And I like to think now that I'm a little bit wiser about how it should have gone, and certainly I try and make sure that my own students don't have the same issues. From finishing my PhD, I went back into the job that I was doing previously, and really have been sort of doing teaching since. So I finished in 2016, graduated a year today after my viva. So folks, this doesn't happen quickly. And when I graduated, I did so with a 5-week-old baby on my arm. So it was very much a busy time. And yeah, that's kind of how I got to doing what I'm doing, which I'm sure is the next question you're going to ask me. So I was very fortunate that I got into supervising, firstly, master's students, as we go through, and then into being involved with the doctoral programs in my faculty. And I just found that I'd found my sweet spot. That was like doing the doctoral thing, doctoral programs of students who are doing doctorates, it was just kind of, I really enjoy it. I enjoy being involved with the students. I enjoy watching them grow, watching the studies develop, and being able to support people in a way that I wasn't supported.
Right.
I mean, it's never easy, and life does life, but at least it's nice to help people grow through their study rather than fight through it.
Yes.
Too often.
Oh, yes. Yes, yes, yes to that, because it's so heartbreaking to see people fighting with themselves, fighting with the topic, fighting with the institution. It's kind of actually, you would hope that people would come out of a doctoral experience with at least some moments of kind of, wow, that there was some golden stuff in there. You've got to hope for that. But blimey, what a journey you went on.
It was big.
What a
it was big.
wow. Wow.
Yeah, there was some great stuff there. And I was really fortunate that I was able to do my study on an organization that I'd been involved with since I was 7 years old. So I knew people, and I was able to really be an insider researcher, which, has its own methodological issues, but was great fun. And I got so many really good stories. I'm kind of tearing up even thinking about it now, because it was so nice to talk to people and be able to make a real contribution to that organization and also to the wider sector through that work, which I never thought I'd be able to do. I never thought I'd be able to do that, but I've changed the practice in that sector through my work, even though I haven't published widely with it, just because of the kind of the involvement that I had in the sector. And so it's been really good to do that, and a lot of fun, even though that was some rubbish times.
So I need to know now what the subject was.
I looked at long-term sport volunteers and the impact of values on their commitment to the organisation. So it's very soft, and we had a framework roughly around why volunteers commit and why they stay committed, but nobody had really looked at the impact of values before. The organisation I work with is very much a values-driven organisation within disability sport, and so it's I just had some fascinating conversations with people, and that's really what stuck out for me about the whole path of the 9 years, was the conversations that I had on the way through. And the way that people were prepared to open up to me, I think particularly as an insider, but to really explore ideas and concepts with me in a way that they hadn't done before. So a lot of my participants kind of said, I've never thought about that before. I never thought about it like that. But that's really interesting what you're saying. And I can see how that would change what we had done. And I wasn't there to change their thinking in an interview, but at the same time, it changed the organisation just through having those conversations.
Oh, how gorgeous is that? And what a testament to how important PhD work can be.
Really is so important. And we lose sight, I think, of that.
Yeah.
We're stuck in the weeds of it. I just hate every bit of it, and it's just going horribly wrong. And this is what I see a lot of the time when I talk to people, that, it's just bad. It's all bad. It's horrid. But I don't think it actually all is. I think we just need to be careful to find the good bits as well. And when you look back on it at the end of it, because you will get through it, it's nice to be able to pinpoint those real highlights. It has taken me a while before I can talk about it without too much rancor, I will admit.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the rancor then. Let's do that. Let's just dive into that, because that's what's here. So this sense of, I think what came through really clearly when you were just talking about that sense of the kind of the human connection and the human element, connection, conversations, that being at the heart of lots of PhDs. And some of the big conversations that you're having, obviously, are with your supervisor and your supervisory team. And that's where some of the rancor can come from, right? So talk to me about this. Talk to me about where you're at with, in terms of managing your supervisor, coming out of your own experience, but also from the PhD, but also your own experience now further down the road.
Sure. I think there's a few things. I mean, again, going back to my experience very quickly, I chased my own supervisor around the conference circuit before they agreed to supervise me.
Right.
So I identified a a subject specialism and went after that. Now, possibly if I knew then what I know now, I might have done it differently. But I was determined I was going to have that supervisor. And I think for a lot of us, we have to pick up on something that is relevant to what we want to study. And so it's quite tempting to go after the supervisor. But I think, for a lot of universities now, you'll go into a program and you'll be given a supervisor. So you don't get a choice. You have to just work with who you're given. But even if you do choose, you don't know what they're going to be like to work with when you get 2 or 3 years in. They're normally academics in the field, and they are technically there to support your progress. But we also have to understand that understanding the role of the supervisor is really important, and they are not there to hold the student's hand. This is my understanding now. Again, I wish I'd known this at the time, that the majority of students are there, the supervisors are there to ensure that you stay on track. In most universities, supervisors get about an hour a month per student, which is not a great deal when you think about the reading, the feedback, the meetings, the discussions, the mining of the theory, the developing concepts that we all want supervisors to do. And yet there isn't that much time to do it, never mind the admin that goes with it. And so really where I come from with this is that if we understand the role of the supervisor, it's easier to work with them.
Yes. And it can be, it can be very revealing. If you look at your own institution's, what's the word, kind of guiding principles for supervisors, a lot of them, as you said, is admin driven. A lot of the roles and the key things that the university is interested in the supervisors doing are administrative tasks. So it is worth just remembering that's what the university is looking for from your supervisor. Yeah, absolutely.
And if my experience of supervising now is anything to go by, those admin tasks are anything but transparent as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've lost count of the number of hours I've spent trying to find the right place to put an intention to submit form.
Yes. Please just tell me. Somebody tell me what to do.
Exactly right. So I think supervisors are under pressure when it's an hour a month. You've got another 300 hours in the month they're doing other things.
Yeah.
And so you're not the priority, as hard as that is to hear and as hard as it is to swallow. And I think the onus needs to be on the student to drive the process and to really understand what they're doing and to own and step up into owning that study and saying, this is what I need to do. This is my intention, and you will come along with me and you will support me in this. Now, without being really dogmatic and aggressive about it, but being very clear that I'm not any longer in the junior role. When we think about the history of doctorates, a doctorate is an apprenticeship. And if you follow me for any period of time, you'll I talk about this a lot. A doctorate is an apprenticeship to be able to step into the world of higher education. Back in the Middle Ages, 16th, 17th centuries, people would literally sit at the feet of their professors for years until they understood what they were doing and how they were doing it, how to conduct a research study. And then they were admitted to the academy. They became the doctor. We're not quite there anymore, but the role of the student is to learn, but to learn as a professional in the field. So if you want a decent relationship with your supervisor, you've got to be prepared to own your study, to say, this is what I'm doing, to be in control of what you're giving them, to give them enough time to read things. For instance, I get ahead of myself, but I think, understanding the way that relationship needs to work, which is that you meet them as an equal. And you talk to them pretty much as an equal, is really important. I walk down the corridor now in the university and I will chat to people who are not necessarily in my field, and it's almost the same relationship where I'm like, well, how does that work? Well, how in your field, how does this framework apply to this area? Because I understand it like this. Oh, but you understand it differently. That's virtually the conversation you have with a supervisor.
Yes.
It's almost a peer-to-peer conversation.
Yes.
Go on.
Well, I was just going to say, and that can be really thrilling, but also very confusing, because I think when you step in,
Yeah.
it is that sense of looking for the teacher.
Yes, and
And
I think we all feel that we don't know anything about a subject. We go in thinking we do know about it, and then we get a few months in and we're like, oh my goodness, I actually have no idea what I'm doing here.
yeah.
Because I get stuck into, there's so many bits of literature and there's so many different methodological approaches, and how am I supposed to make decisions about this? And how do I know which way to go? How do I know which bits to discuss? I've got so many things when I get further down the road that I want to talk about, and I can't talk about all of it. So how do I decide? And your supervisor can give you ideas. They can say, I think this bit needs to stay in and this bit needs to come out. But if you're attached to this bit they want to take out, you've got a big discussion to have there. But at the end of the day, it's your work. And certainly in the UK and Europe, it's not your supervisor who puts the stamp on your doctorate. So they are not marking it. And I think that's a really important thing to bear in mind as well.
Yes, yes, because I think people can get into really wanting to please their supervisor.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, they have no impact on the outcome of life.
No, and then you can end up with a thesis that you didn't really want to do because you did it because it's your supervisor, and it wasn't really how it turned out how it was going to be. Because so I think exactly as you say, this sense of them as a kind of as an advisor, as someone who is an expert advisor on your work, but is not there to market, and is not there to run it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, there are so many things the university doesn't teach you. You might have early classes on critical reviews, on methodology, on putting a research project together, on even understanding the whole of the research thing. But they won't teach you how to manage a big project. They won't teach you how to make sure things are on time. They won't teach you how to communicate in a professional academic way. On the whole, I've yet to come across a university that does do all of those things. And those are big learning curves, and your supervisor can help you with those as well. But they're not there to teach you these things. They're there to ensure, to an extent, that what you write is of a sufficient quality, not that it's got the right answers in it. That's your responsibility as a student. And so, managing your supervisor, which is what we're here to talk about, is really about understanding that relationship is a peer-to-peer relationship, and your role within it is to act as a professional.
So talk to us a bit about that then, in terms of, as you say, this is a massive learning curve in terms of stepping in as a academic professional. How to go about that? What are your thoughts?
So the first stage in that is to be clear that you're there to learn, but also to be clear that you're there because you have a right to be there. You weren't accepted onto this program by accident. You weren't accepted because the university needed the money. You weren't accepted just to make up numbers and because they needed another bum on the seat in the room. You were accepted onto this program because you have an interesting idea. You are judged to have the potential to be worthy of a place in the academy. And you are there because they want you to be there. Now, it might not feel like that some of the time, but that's the reality of it.
Absolutely. So many people say, I'm not sure, and I think that they've just, were just being nice. I was like, no, there is in the contemporary university, there's no place for being nice. People, exactly as you said, people are there. You're there because you deserve to be there, and really, really, really take that on. Really take that.
You have to own that, because that is key to having that persona, which is, I have a right to be here and I have the ability to be here. I may not know everything. I mean, who does? Who does? I remember one of my lecturers when I was an undergraduate used to say to new classes, right, what's the difference between me and you? You know more than we do, and you've been around a lot longer. And he'd say, no, actually, the main difference is I know how to ask better questions than you now. And that's when you get to this level of studying for a doctorate, you know how to ask better questions.
Yeah.
The role of the next few years is to learn how to ask even better questions.
Yes. Yeah.
And so becoming that academic professional is about asking the good question. And you'll have the best conversations with your supervisors if you go in with good questions to ask them.
Yes. And I think not being afraid, as you say, with those questions, not being afraid to put your questions front and centre to set the agenda rather than to wait for the questions to come at you.
Yes. Yeah, and I think, you're not there to be tested, you're there to learn, and you're there to develop what you are doing. I know the best conversations I have with my students are when they are prepared for meetings and they have come and they have, they may not have written anything, but they've read something, or they've got an interesting idea. Beginning stages, so they kind of say, well, I'd like to look at this, but I could also look at this, and these are my reasons for doing these things.
Yeah.
And you can have that real in-depth conversation with them and allow them to explore. Seeing people grow is why most people do this thing.
Yes. And I think it's also worth knowing that people fight over PhD students, right? They want to work with PhD students because it's exciting and interesting, and this sense of kind of being at the cutting edge of research. This is great. So this sense of you, if you open up your research and invite your supervisor to kind of develop that with you, that is a joy for them. So you don't feel like you're kind of putting something on them. You're giving them a gift, right?
Yes, and I think, the enthusiasm and the new energy that people bring in when they're engaged in original study is something that does refresh the jaded palate of the admin-heavy academic.
There you go. There you go.
And so, you as the doctoral student are the one who is bringing that light into their lives, or should be.
Yes.
And so it's, again, step into the value that you bring to that process.
Yes. You may be the highlight of their week. Remember that.
I know for me, it certainly is when I look at my diary each week and I'm like, oh, I've got so and so in this week. That's great. I'm really looking forward to know how they're getting on. And I think for most people, if the conversations are interesting, they want to have them.
Yes.
Where it becomes difficult is where the student is not prepared to take that responsibility for their study.
Yes.
And
So
that would be early on in my PhD, when I sat there and I didn't believe I had the right to be in the room. I didn't believe I knew what I was doing. And I got pushed and pulled all over the place by different supervisors. I had, I think, 5 second supervisors in the first 3 years. It was a revolving door.
blimey.
And everyone came in with their own ideas. Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? I think you should look at this. I think you should do that.
Yes.
And it was only 3 years. I mean, I was part-time 3 years in, where I just threw my toys out the pram in a meeting. Literally, I just said, I am not doing this anymore. This is what I want to look at. This is what I'm going to do. This is my framework. I don't understand how it's going to work yet, but this is what I'm going to do. And my supervisors, both of them, sat back in the chairs and said, well, thank goodness for that.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah, I thought I was going to be fired as a student.
Yes,
They said, right, you just made that breakthrough.
yes.
You can come.
Yes.
But that was the point at which it started to become possible for me to do this study.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I as a supervisor, I tend to push my students very hard early on to get them to that point a bit earlier than I got there.
Right.
So that they do then have something they own, and they can sort of say, right, this is what I'm doing. And that makes it much easier. And then hopefully you avoid the, am I doing the right thing? Have I got the right framework? Much closer to submission, which is always a little bit worrying.
Yes. And it's so exhausting, just second guessing yourself all the time.
Oh, absolutely.
Brilliant. Right. So we've got, because I'm aware of time and I want to make sure that we get all the good stuff from you. So this got this sense of working as a peer with your supervisor. Anything else that you would suggest in terms of management? And we've had this thing of setting agendas and this sense of kind of taking ownership, being in control.
I think the other thing I'd really love people to understand is that the relationship with your supervisors will change at different stages of your study.
Yes.
And so at the beginning, it's very much exploratory. You're getting to know each other. You're kind of doing a little bit of dance around each other and being very polite.
Yes.
And then when you get into the meat of the thing, where you're starting to work on your methods, you're starting to think about how you collect the data, what you're going to be doing, and really what frameworks you're using, and what theories you want to develop, you get a little bit more robust. Which is putting it quite politely. I think this is stormy meetings, and and but that robustness of the relationship only lasts for a period of time, what really whilst you're developing frameworks and concepts, and then you should go into a much more counselling, conciliative phase towards the end, where you're writing up, and there will be stages where somebody will send, well, the supervisor will send it back to you and say, basically, this is rubbish, rewrite it. But hopefully, in a decent relationship with your supervisor, it comes back with constructive comments and you can work on those. But by that point, you are definitely stepping into those shoes of, this is mine, I own it, and I am able to defend it. So I think that understanding the changing nature of the relationship and the changing push-pull within it is important to making it work.
Yes. Yes. And I think it is absolutely that, in terms of it will be an evolving, organic relationship, in a very different way to when you have your undergraduate teacher and you see them in that kind of mode and they continue in that mode, really. Actually, the sense of somebody who is in that project with you, and evolving as the project evolves, and what you need them for in that project is going to change. So that is really golden to remember, and to remember that the PhD is in phases. It isn't a thing; it's phases of the thing. Brilliant.
Yeah, I think so. And I think also that it depends a little bit on what field you're in. I mean, I maintain the process that you go through and the outcome, the output is almost exactly the same, regardless of whether you're doing hard science or you're doing very soft and fluffy stuff like I did. The topic areas are different, the frameworks are different, of course, the way you think about things are different, but that process is pretty much the same. And so the relationship will go through those those phases, those patterns of push and pull, regardless of what you're doing. And also regardless of how long it takes, I think, as well.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. There's a kind of arc to the work. This is great. This is great. And I think also just naming the fact that this can be tricky. This can be a really tricky element. So if you are finding that difficult, know that you are not on your own with that. Know that you are not on your own. But the kind of keeping communication open, I think, is really important. Really important.
I think I get contacted by a lot of people who feel that they've been ghosted by supervisors.
Right.
And and that can happen. It can happen both ways. And I think particularly where people are not. No, I'm not going to leave the blame with anybody. And I don't intend this to sound like I'm trying to lay the blame with anybody. But I think particularly where people are not clear about what they're trying to achieve with the study, it becomes much more difficult to stay engaged with it as a supervisor. Because you feel like you're following the student around the whole field of possibility. And that doesn't make for a good relationship.
No, because supervisors want to be briefed, right? Don't they? This is the deal. Exactly.
You want to know what you're getting hold of. And I think, certainly, again, where I've worked with people who have gone a little bit around the houses, and maybe 4 or 5 years in, and still haven't nailed down what they're trying to achieve, or it's changed again, or it's changed again, or it's changed again. Just decide on something and move forward. You can't write this thing unless you are focused on something. At the end of the day, what you're doing is starting broad and going to a point where you finish the thing where you know a very, very great deal about virtually nothing.
Yes.
It's a funnel, isn't it? And it's a very narrow funnel at the bottom.
Yes. Yes.
You walk into that Viva room and you know almost everything there is to know about pretty much nothing.
Yes.
Something that is so small it could dance on the head of a pin. And you're not going to get to that point unless you cut out some options. And at some point say, just like choosing the new city, I don't like that style. I'm not looking at anything that's that style.
Yeah.
It has to be this color, therefore it's not available in this color. I'm not going to look at it. It doesn't matter how pretty it is.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how interesting it is. At some point, you've got to put the blinkers on. So, for the next 3 years of my life, I am going to focus on this thing here.
Yeah.
And when you do that, it makes it much easier for your supervisor to stick with you.
Well, you'll get your best value for money that way, won't you? Because you'll be able to say, I want you to help me attend to this. And then they can really apply themselves to that, ideally.
And I think a lot of the conversations are not necessarily about the topic itself, are they? They're about, how do I do this? How do I go about this process? How do I write this better? How do I focus on this without going down this rabbit hole that is not quite relevant to what I'm doing? And those are conversations that supervisors will willingly have, but there has to be a focus for them.
Yeah.
There's this whole thing about being the professional in the room, but owning what you're doing, about making those decisions is is really important.
Yeah.
And then you get to the actual, if somebody is just being difficult. I'm loath to speak ill of my colleagues, but there are people who are more difficult than others. We know this. And and sometimes you need to understand within the university what your areas of recourse are, who else you can talk to, how you can get help to mend a relationship that's gone wrong. And those resources are available in the university. And I point a number of people every month to a director of research who within the faculty who can help to mend or fix relationships or deal with relationships that have gone slightly askew. And that's an important thing too. Again, it's about being that professional, emotionally distancing yourself enough from the relationship that you can say, this isn't exactly where it should be. I want it to look more like this. This is how I'm going to take it forward and try to mend this.
Yeah. Yeah. And and ultimately, sadly, sometimes things just don't work out. And as as you experienced, and then you need to change it up. And that sometimes can happen too. I think sometimes people feel they don't want to cause trouble, or but it's your project, it's your PhD, and you want to make sure that you are able to complete it with this, that might mean making hard decisions along the way as well.
Absolutely. And I just looked down at my desk now, and I've got a piece of paper in front of me which came out of my diary of all things. And it says, your life will be no better than the plans you make and the action you take. You are the architect and builder of your own life, fortune, and destiny.
Wow.
From Alfred A. Montepert. I'll send that to you, Emma.
Blimey, I love your diary. That's deep.
Oh, occasionally these things fall out, and I'm like, wow, where did that come from? But I think you are the architect and builder of your own life and your own doctorate, and you can take that responsibility and say, I'm not working with somebody like this. I wouldn't work with somebody like this in a regular office. I'm not working with somebody like this now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that actually, for most supervisors, is the kind of, oh, thank goodness for that moment where people do step up and start to take responsibility for what they're doing.
Hear to that. Right, I am aware now that we need to kind of come into a close, and I'm going to ask you the very unfair question of, out of all that was here, is there a top tip that you would leave people with?
Can I share three? No, really quick. Right, first one is First one is step up, be the professional in the room, prepare for everything, set agendas, keep timings on track for meetings, be prepared for meetings. This is number two. So if you're going to a supervisory meeting or you're going to have contact with supervisor, be prepared. Make sure that if you want them to look at something, you share it in plenty of time and you're clear what you want feedback on. Do not just send somebody 10,000 words and say, what do you think? What do you want feedback on? Do you want it on the section? Do you want it on the flow? Do you want it on the literature? Do you want the methodology looking at? Tell them what you need so they can be effective with it too, and with their time. And finally, accept that everybody is an individual. And especially when you are in academia, you will find the oddbods and the weirdos. We are all slightly odd. We are all completely unmanageable. One of my deans once said that managing academics was like trying to herd cats. And the obvious answer is, well, why would you try and do that? But we are all a bit odd. If we fitted into boxes, we'd be out there in corporate earning a lot more money. Accept people. Generally, people are good-hearted. Generally, they want to see you succeed, but sometimes they just need a little bit of help to get you there. So accept that they bring the value and work out how you can best help them as well as them helping you. I think that's probably my top tip.
I love it. Yes. Welcome to the world of eccentrics. That's what academia is. That's what it is. And on that note, Gina, thank you so much. And I know you do a lot of fantastic work with people, and we will have all your amazing diary quotes, but also your contact details and things in the show notes if people, I'm sure, will want to follow up and find you. Thank you so much for being here today and for all your wisdom.
I've really enjoyed being here, Emma. Thank you. It's great to meet you and to chat to you about this. Obviously, it's something I'm pretty passionate about, and there's a lot of room for improvement, but there's a lot of good practice out there as well. So I think, just don't lose hope, because there's a lot of us working to make things easier for people and better.
Lovely. Thank you. And thank you all for listening.